over the long holiday, because I am an American and I celebrate Thanksgiving, something came across my feed on Twitter that was, well, a thing. An ad for a newly released manga called Drama Queen on Manga Plus. So, being the tired boy that I am, I ignored it until about an hour later and my feed flooded with all the comments about how racist and xenophobic this manga was. And having been through this arc with Frieren, when the anime came out, I decided I'd check it out because it would at least be worth a laugh to see why people think it's so bad. But this one, no, I can genuinely understand where the issue is coming from on this one. In this series, the world, our world, is occupied by humans and aliens. Supposedly, the aliens were responsible for destroying a massive meteor headed to Earth that would have destroyed the entire planet. And as thanks, they were basically granted permission to live on the planet. Their technology greatly advanced human life, and most people seem to be happy about their presence because they're viewed as a net benefit. Except for our main character. She has a problem with the way the aliens behave. She regularly gets elbowed in the face by aliens and never gets an apology that she feels she deserves. In fact, the one time she calls an alien out for it, she's accused of falsely accusing him of a crime. On top of that, her boss, who is an alien, subjects her and her co-workers to absurd conditions at work just to make a few extra bucks. Basically, her view is that the aliens might have saved Earth, but they have no concept of how to behave in conjunction with the inhabitants of the planet, and she wishes they would just disappear. Fortunately for her, she finds respite in a kindred soul, a male co-worker of hers who also happens to have a bone to pick with the aliens after they killed his family in a car accident and were never held to account for their crime. They both end up finding a small bit of happiness in their miserable lives with their shared hatred of these alien occupiers, and that even leads them to speculate that the whole invasion may have been a spoof to manipulate the human race. And now here's where everything goes absurdly off the rails and why I can't help but read this regardless of how I feel about the series. Male coworker has a bad day followed by a run-in with one of these rude aliens and ends up beating the thing to death in the first chapter. Wow. I say thing because they both kind of agree at this point that neither of them see the alien as a person. Main character, being the only person he knows who hates the aliens just as much as he does, is thus dragged into covering up the crime with him. At first he suggests dicing the body up and disposing of it in bits, but then our girl gets a bright idea. You see, she's broke. Her job didn't pay her much, and she just got fired after the boss accidentally lit himself on fire and burned to death. And it's been a while since she's had a good meal. Yeah, she fucking eats the corpse, cooks the bastard up, and eats the whole damned human-sized alien in one sitting. Yeah, this manga is utterly fucked, and there's no two ways about it. And my sense of morbid curiosity demands I continue reading it, not out of any genuine love for this story, because there are some things about it that I just think are whack, but out of a desire to see just how much more fucked this whole thing gets, because that aspect, at least, is pretty fucking entertaining. So yeah, I can totally understand the racism allegations for this one, but that also calls into question the interpretation of things, because I see three possible different lenses through which to view this manga. One that only has a singular chapter, by the way, so there's not much more context to add to this, that can change how you look at it. Firstly is the point of view that I just went through, the anti-non-Japanese people. I don't think I need to explain where you can get that from after all of that plot synopsis I just gave, but it is definitely the least favorable interpretation of the media that you can genuinely get from this series. Now, the second is closely related, but not exactly the same. It could be interpreted as a rebuke of the foreigners who come to Japan and show no respect for their culture, way of life, or rule of law. The most famous of these would be the Johnny Somali types. May he rest in piss. But more than that, people who have come to Japan and shown no respect for the rules, defacing religious monuments, breaking rules about taking photos of geishas, and much more. Suffice it to say, I could actually understand this interpretation if it happens to be the case, because I'm genuinely surprised Japan still allows tourism with how much of a problem tourists can be for them. I feel like every other week there's a new article about how tourists are fucking around and finding out over there. And if that's the case, this manga isn't really racist, it's just not much more than an expression of frustration towards how foreigners do not conform to the culture of the nation they're in, and is really just an angry rant made by one fed up citizen who wants jackasses to stop abusing his country for the good it offers. Now, you might not like that they care about their culture and want to keep it the way it is, but that's why the fuck we have nations to begin with. And there's also the interpretation that this is a commentary on US military presence in Japan. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Japan has a treaty with the US that allows us to keep military forces in the nation. And depending on who you are, that reason changes. The US says it's a part of the military global reach, but some of the natives of Japan feel differently and view it as a continued occupation since the end of the Second World War. And I can't blame them really for viewing it as an occupation force, especially when you have foreign soldiers on your soil at any given time. Though, with this interpretation, there becomes an issue because some details conflict with it, so suffice it to say, I think that on this side, the most generous interpretation I can give it is the commentary on foreigners disrespecting the culture. But each and every one of those interpretations assumes that you're supposed to root for the main character, that you're supposed to sympathize with them, and that they're the ones in the right. So what happens if they're not? Well, there were some odd details that just don't quite sit right with me. Or didn't, until someone compiled them all and started talking about them on Twitter. Particularly how this really captured the vibe of a rant of a conspiracy theorist who was about to tell me that the Jews caused wildfires in California with space lasers. As I kinda suspected, and as very thoroughly pointed out by a guy on Twitter, this surface level shock value could just be an entire distraction for what's really going on. What if, rather than anything stated above as to what this is all supposed to mean, this was a commentary on the kinds of maladjusted people who get swept away in this kind of thinking? That some other group is somehow responsible for all the woes of their life and they just refuse to take responsibility for the course of their own lives. Now, some of these things I did notice right away. Others I only noticed after reading some people compiling these details. The anti-Semitic conspiracy theory aspect was one thing that I noticed myself. That made me chuckle, but the kicker was really in the fine details, like Mr. Coworker clearly stalking the main character. Seriously, he finds her address and information on the internet, unprompted, and even shows up to her house with the dead body of one of the guys who had elbowed her in the face earlier in the series. And it's strange how he seems to intervene in her life when it comes to the alien problem, or just show up wherever she goes randomly throughout the chapter. Already, this is clearly not looking like a healthy dynamic. Desperate girl meets manipulative stalker dude. Yeah, sounds like we're about to be in for a real ride with this series. And doubling down on this idea is the fact that the title, Drama Queen, is a bit of a hint as to the nature of the series as well. I mean, the fact that it's named after a caricature of someone who responds to everything in an over-the-top and melodramatic fashion, almost as if the author is trying to say that they're not being entirely truthful or just overreacting to a lot of these things, might just be a clue as to who our main character actually is and what's really going on. And there was the rumor circulating that this was created by another Fujimoto assistant, which would definitely lend to some fuckery. But I could not confirm this, and the wiki page of Fujimoto himself never said anything about the author for this manga being his assistant. All that said, we're gonna have to wait a couple of days, because there's only one chapter out right now. Until it actually comes to light what the intention behind this series is, we can only really point out that it can be interpreted as racist, not that it should be interpreted as racist. And even if the manga is supposed to come off as racist, it could very well be that you aren't supposed to side with the main characters, much like you aren't supposed to side with Hamlet in the play named after him. Hell, this manga could take an entirely different course over the next few chapters and really throw us through a loop. We've seen one very shocking introduction, one that has riled a lot of people up, but we have yet to really see where it's going. It's hard to judge a book by its cover, and a manga by its first chapter. But apparently it was doing really well for the first couple of days, and it hit number 5. So I'll be curious to see what becomes of it. And if you enjoyed this video, I've got plenty of other random coverage things that you can check out. Hope you enjoy. Later.